So welcome everyone. Good. We have a small group. That means if there's questions, it'll be really nice and easy. No one has to feel intimidated. Again, my name's Joe Harmon. I'm a retirement income certified professional and an independent fiduciary advisor. And as Renee mentioned, I've been working with Grand Rapids Christian. I think this is our 9th year now that we've been doing this. Now, in my day job, I spend the majority of my time working with retirees and pre-retirees in terms of developing, monitoring, and implementing retirement income plans. So you're probably wondering, what in the world is a retirement guy here to talk to us about college? Well, everything is intricately related in your financial life. And really, when you kind of think about, American culture, we know that on average, most people are behind where they need to be in saving for their financial future. And then you think about like the life cycle of a parent and how crazy that is, right? It's like you get married, you have kids, and pretty much you're in a grind for like 15 to 20 years, depending how many kids you have. And it feels like you're living up to here. And if someone throws a pebble into the water, it feels like, let's cancel that you're drowning, right? And it's a grind. So we know that, like, before we know it, our kids are in there's a lot going on, and it's overwhelming. And so what we want to talk about is how to survive paying for college, truths, myths, and winning strategies. Okay? So I'm going to try and keep this relatively short because I know I'm already having technical difficulties too. Hold on, this PowerPoint is. It's stuck for some reason. Oh. All right, so I might have to maybe do this. So time, I'm trying to keep it about 40 minutes. I want to keep questions general in nature. I know there's the tendency to want to ask specific questions. But as I mentioned, I'm an independent fiduciary. Does anyone know what fiduciary means? Anyone familiar with that term? It's just a best interest standard. So same thing, like when you go into a doctor's office, and you go to get checked up on something, you want something looked at, they're going to look at everything. They're doing an evaluation, ask questions. They might do labs and diagnostics because they really want to figure out everything that's going on before they give you any kind of medical advice. And it's the same thing in the financial world. So, we're all meeting for the first time. I don't unfortunately haven't had a chance to get to know any of you. So if there's questions, we just want to keep them general in nature. If you do have specific questions, we can do an individual session. You have eval forms. Please go ahead and feel free to fill those out. Every year, as Renee knows, we try to make this presentation better and better. So if you think I stink, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Go ahead and say, hey, this really wasn't that helpful. Could you do X, Y, Z? That's good feedback for me. And then at any point in this conversation, if you want to schedule a session to talk about your specific situation and your specific questions, you would have time to do that. All right? So that's just the housekeeping item. So here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to talk about how much does college cost, how do you reduce your college cost, and how do you fund your college cost. Okay? So we're going to start first with the big question. Keep going backwards. Cost of college today. All right? So the way that the institutions are going to look at this is cost of attendance. Right? That's the definition, or the acronym COA. Stands for tuition, room and board, books, fees, transportations, and miscellaneous expenses. And you want to make sure that you're defining cost of attendance in this parameter because the tendency is to just look at something like tuition, as we got bolded in red, or room and board. And the truth of the matter is that it's all encompassing. Okay, so let me kind of point this out. Like public 2-year community college, I've got down here average cost of $12,000 to $17,000 per year. And I know some of you in this room, including Renee, would be like, there's no way that's accurate. Because if people want to go to GRCC, they can probably send them for a few $1,000s a year or part of the GR Promise. There's different things set up. But my point is with that is that when you're looking at other schools outside of even the Grand Rapids area, they're going to look at the total cost of attendance. What would the cost be if your kid were to go away to a school? They're still going to look at it from that perspective. So we want to look at what it would be to send your kid away for a year. So it's not just tuition. So we want to make sure we're doing an apples-to-apples comparison on cost and not an apples to oranges. Okay? So public 4-year in-state college, $20,000 to $36,000 per year. Public 4-year out of state, $35,000 to $54,000 a year. And then private 4-year school can range widely, anywhere from $35,000 a year up north to $70,000 a year. There you're probably talking more about the private elite colleges. So, most of the time we get to this point in the presentation, and now the question of surviving college seems like a real, question, because this is daunting, right? This is pretty expensive. I mean, stop and think about it for a second. Buying 1 year of college is like buying one new car. And I really love this analogy, and I can't take credit for it. I got to thank my colleague, Beth Walker. But if you think about this, it's a perfect analogy, because we could spend $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, even $70,000 on a car, right? And there's a lot of work that we put into thinking about which car is going to be best. And we're hoping, right, it's a long-term decision. It's going to last us somewhere between 5 and 17 years. But with college, think about what we have to do. We get to buy a car, and then at the end of the year, we get to drive it off a cliff and then go buy a new one, right? So if we've got one kid, we're not just buying 1 year of college, we're buying a fleet, right? At least 4. And potentially, if we got multiple kids, we got 4 kids, it could be 16 years of cars that you're going to have to buy. So, this is the realization for people, is like, wow, college is expensive. And it's not the same that it was back in the 80s and 90s when people were going to college, when those parents were going to school, because the cost has gone up exponentially. It's not reasonable anymore to say, hey, a student can do a part-time job, work really hard in the summer, and take modest student loans, and everything is going to be just fine. 80s and 90s, we could do that. That's not the case anymore. So we really have to think about this more strategically and realize that this is a big cost. So how are we going to navigate it? All right? So funding college. So every student and parent should be able to answer these 3 questions very early in the college planning process on the financial side before you do anything else. Okay? So that first one is, how much is the most that we are willing to pay? It sounds like a pretty basic question, right? I can tell you for a fact, in doing all these presentations and meeting with a lot of families, this hardly ever gets done. We don't think with the end in mind. We just kind of think, we kind of got to do this in the college selection piece. We kind of want to let our kid run that. And then what ends up happening is we don't really do any analysis, and then we're just like, we got to get this done. Get these applications in, pick some schools, and go forward. The other aspect of this, too, is, do we know what we're spending? I know people hate the word budget. That's why I use the word spending plan. But even if you don't have one, try tracking your spending just on an annual basis. Even if you change nothing, you will be surprised at what goes on in your financial life, right? I mean, just even I was at how much we spend at Costco? Like, what, I get caught on an end aisle and find something attractive every time I went there. So there's a lot to be found in just saying, okay, let's sit down and think about this. X is the amount that we can is going to be reasonable for us to pay for college and stay up to speed for retirement. Then we want to look at how can we reduce our cost at each particular college, right? We want to figure out, once we know how much we're willing to pay, well, how can we create a good college list? If we can reduce the cost, maybe we can add some more colleges into the mix that would be a better fit for our students. And then last is, how will we fund the college expense, right? How do we bring this all together once we've done everything we can do to reduce the cost? How are we going to pay it as wisely as possible so that we're not increasing the financial pressure in our own lives? All right? Okay, so we talked a little bit about the cost of college. Now the big question is, how do we reduce the cost of college? Okay, so obviously college selection is going to play a huge role in this. And just kind of a simple example, if we've got an Accounting 101 course and you can pay $220 versus $786, I mean, we're talking about a massive discount here. Right? So college selection is going to play a huge role. And I always like to interject this conversation. I feel safe to do this in the Christian community as well as the Catholic Central community, because you guys will point your kids in the right direction. This is where community college can also be a viable option for people. And they could be getting, some of them are probably getting credits now while they're here at Grand Rapids Christian. And some may, align their curriculum to say, I'll do my first year or 2 years, getting my general studies done there. and then I can transfer. And I've got my own personal story with that. Pretty much what I did. I went to Holy Cross College across the street from Notre Dame back when it was a junior college. And I did a year and a half there, and then I got lucky enough to get to go to Notre Dame for my halfway through my sophomore year. And I can tell you that I have friends from Holy Cross. I had a great experience. It made me appreciate my time at Notre Dame. So it's not that that community college is the best fit for everyone, but especially when you have situations where maybe kids are unsure and we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, or maybe it's just a family that's saying, hey, this is all we can afford. This is a great path, and it's a completely viable path. So what are some other factors? Well, certainly how long a kid is in college is going to play a role. And what's surprising is how the national average of how long it takes a student to get through college is 5.5 years. All right, so as parents, we want to lay the ground rules and set the expectation as, hey, you're done in 4. Right? If you're going to do a victory lap, that's going to be all on you to figure out and sort out. We want to make sure that they're done in 4 years. Otherwise, we could be looking at paying tens of thousands of dollars more in college tuition. There's also things that you can look at in terms of stats for how long on average does it take someone to graduate from a particular university. So if you're looking at somewhere where it's going to take 6 years, that might make you think what's kind of the student body like? Are they a little more interested in the experience of college, or are they serious about, getting stuff done in the classroom? That doesn't mean your child wouldn't fit in at that type of institution, but it's just a good thing to be aware of in terms of your planning, because we want them out in 4 years to keep the cost down overall. That's going to help reduce it. Financial aid. This is probably the big area, but I know there's some people when you get to this section where they're like, oh, I hope Joe breezes over this, because this really doesn't apply to my family situation. And what I just want to make sure that we're clear on is that there's different kinds of financial aid. And what you're going to realize as you go through this presentation tonight is that one or two may apply to you, but one of the two for sure is going to apply to you, whether that's merit or need-based aid, and it's up to you to determine, what's going to apply to my situation. And then once I know that, which one I want to start looking for in terms of building a list of schools to reduce the cost. So we want to look at what is financial aid, where does it come from, and then who qualifies for it. All right? So what are the costly assumptions, right? I make too much money, right? There's no doubt that income counts significantly on the financial aid forms and a thing that will hurt you most. But I want to tell you, I've seen a lot of different instances where people making good money have gotten financial aid depending on the circumstances, right? So that's something we want to be wary of. I encourage every family I meet with, regardless of their situation, to apply for financial aid. We'll wait until after our student is accepted to apply for financial aid. That can be a mistake, because then you are at the risk of missing deadlines, and likely you would. And if that hasn't been completed along with the application, at least in the priority deadlines, you run the risk of not getting any kind of the money that you really want, which is like the gift aid in the form of scholarships and grants. So want to make sure that we're meeting all the deadlines. Our children's grades are too low. Now, certainly, you hear the phrase, and I've said it before in previous conversations or presentations, that those that make the grade get the A. And while I believe there's truth in that, still, it's all relative to your student and the colleges that they're applying to. So if you're looking at a school where he or she's going to finish at the bottom 50%, well, yeah, they may not get as good enough of an award as someone who finishes in the top 25%. But there are colleges out there where their GPA test scores and everything else will be relative to the admitted class at that particular college where they fall in the top 25%. Okay, so that grades are not the be-all, end-all when it comes to financial aid. Our home is worth too much. Okay, this is more of an issue in larger real estate markets like California, but certainly, we've had home equity ramp up with all that's gone on the last couple of years, especially in Grand Rapids. We have a really tight market. And of course, a lot of people have been racing to pay off their houses as much as possible. So you could have a significant amount of home equity. And what you want to understand is that some colleges look at it and some colleges don't. I'd even venture to say most colleges don't look at it. But you want to be aware of the colleges that do if that's something that's going to be sizable in your situation. Okay? Debt load will help financial aid need. If I'm in debt, I'm going to get more financial aid. This is a big misunderstanding because I can tell you that debt is not even a factor in how they calculate your financial need. There's 7 factors which we'll go through. It's parent income and assets, student income and assets, number of kids in college, number of people in the household, and the age of the oldest parent. Those are the only 7 that they collect data on and actually number crunch. Debt does not play a role at all. So if we've got bad debt, we want to work on paying that down before we get to college so that we don't have bad debt on top of college to pay for, where now we're really going to ratchet up the financial pressure. And we'll talk a little bit today about the difference between good debt and bad debt. Our student will get more aid if independent, right? So they're saying here, like, well, I'll just let my kid do the financial aid forms and they'll get more aid, or we don't have anything to report, so we're not going to do it, or we don't have anything to contribute, so we're not going to do it. It's very, very rare for to meet one of the exclusions where the parents don't have to put anything on the financial aid forms. So again, remember those 2 of the factors that need to be reported are parent income and assets. And it's really hard to get away from that. So that doesn't mean that you have to contribute a cent towards your kid's college education. It just means that, by one of the best things you could do if you've got nothing to help them with is by doing that, you may help them get access to financial aid. That will drastically reduce the cost of college, or who knows, they hit the financial aid jackpot at some of the schools that they'd be able to get into. Okay, like I can tell you, if you're as a domer, if you're lucky enough to get into Notre Dame and your family's low income, you're going to get to go to Costa Notre Dame for ridiculously cheap because they meet 100% of need with an almost entirely free money. So that, again, we want to make sure that parents are completing their part of the aid forms. All right, so what is the biggest cost assumption? I do not qualify for need-based financial aid, therefore I do not need to complete the applications, right? I make $1 million a year, doesn't matter, I'm not going to complete the financial aid application. Even if you're in that situation, here's why you would still want to do it, okay? You may be required to complete the FAFSA, the CSS profile, which we'll talk about later, to get access to merit aid, right? And merit aid has nothing to do with the student's ability to pay. It's just based on merit criteria. If they meet it, they get it. And the reason why they want these financial aid forms to see is because they are interested in doling out the government money first before they start doling out their own money, right? So they're going to look at your situation. If you don't qualify, they're going to go, okay, they don't qualify. We can't give them government money. Then we're going to figure out how much we're going to give of our own institutional dollars. You need them to complete. You need to complete these to get access to the student loans. So your sophomore year or freshman year, you get $5,500. Sophomore year, $6,500. Junior and senior year, $7,500. Right? You need to apply each year to get access to those. If you wait until junior or senior year, you can't go back and get the first 2 years of the money. So you want to make sure you're taking. If you are going to need that you want to take advantage of that. And there are some of the best loans. We'll talk about them a little bit more. That you get there's no collateral, and yet you get some of the most preferred rates you possibly can out there. So if we want access to those, we want to do that. And it doesn't matter your income. Like if you're low income, you may get a portion of those loans subsidized by the government, meaning they'll pay the interest, a piece of the interest, while your student's in college. But even unsubsidized, you still get access to the full amount. These kind of go together with being prepared for a change of financial status and better positioned for appeals. Okay, so the pandemic is a very good example of what happened here. All right, so think about what happened to some business owners that were doing really, really well at the end of 2019 and then the start of 2020, and then lockdown happened. Right? A lot of businesses were on the brink of closure or disaster, and a lot of families had a big change in their financial status. Well, if they're in college and they completed the aid form, they can go to the college and go, our family situation has drastically changed. and be able to provide evidence of what's actually happened. And they may come back and say, well, guess what? We're going to give you X amount more a year. It could be significant more money depending on the institution to help make sure your kid can stay enrolled in college while we're waiting for the lockdowns to end and people to get back to business. So, but if we don't apply, then we're not going to have that opportunity. And then the last but not least is uncomfortable or comfortable as it may seem. Colleges want wealthy clients. Okay, I have seen wealthy clients get higher merit aid awards than the general awards simply because they want to attract wealthy clients for them, they're businesses, right? It's like clients for them. So they want to attract them because they're thinking, okay, we're going to make an investment in them that's going to come back to us in the form of endowment funds and things in the future that the student, had a good experience here. They're going to want to give money back, all right? So again, as comfortable or as uncomfortable as it may seem, that's just the reality, okay? All right, so how to apply for financial aid. So has anyone here not heard of the free application for federal student aid or the acronym FAFSA? Okay, we got a first time around that one. There's always one or two. So this is the main financial aid form that pretty much every institution outside of like Hillsdale is going to require you to complete, okay? And this is used for federal dollars. So think of like the direct loans, the Pell Grants, and then you've got some other colleges, about 200 or so, that utilize the CSS profile run by the College Board. It's a much more sophisticated form that's like blood, sweat, and tears to complete. But this is where you can find that really lucrative money in terms of $20,000, $30,000, institutional grants, because this is coming from, again, the college's own endowment funds. So I will say, just so people know, it's mostly private colleges, but University of Michigan is one of the exceptions where they do this form. And then you have some college-specific forms. So you may have a couple of colleges I know in our area that will do like the FAFSA, but they'll also do a supplemental form. And then you got a college like Hillsdale that they don't do any federal funding, so they don't use the FAFSA or the profile. They have their own unique methodology, which no one exactly knows what it is. It's probably pretty close to the FAFSA, though. So we want to make sure that we meet all the specific deadlines as it relates to the financial aid applications, right? If we miss this, as I said earlier, we could end up costing ourselves $10,000, $20,000 in potential institutional grants if you would qualify for them. And it's very easy to meet these deadlines. The financial aid process is much better than it was several years ago because they changed the format to what they call prior year format. So the FAFSA and the CSS profile will open up in October of your student's senior year, the 1st of October. So you can go in there and you're going to take the prior year. So if you got a senior this year, they're going into fall 2022, you're going to use your 2020 tax return for all your income information. So that's all done. You have everything you need. And usually the priority deadlines are either February, March. You want to check with your school, so you have plenty of time. My rule of thumb is try to get it done before Thanksgiving. It gives you like 6 to 8 weeks to get it done. As long as you get it done before then, I don't think you're going to have an issue of getting, like some people say, well, you have to do it in the first week or you could miss out on aid. I haven't seen a lot of that. So I think just get it done before Thanksgiving. Okay, so now that we understand what the aid forms are, and they're going to collect all this data on us. They're going to collect those 7 factors I talked about: the parent income, parent assets, student income and assets, number of kids in college, number of people in the household, and the age of the oldest parent. That's the 7 pieces of information that they're going to collect. And then they're going to put it through a calculation, and what the output from that calculation is this acronym EFC, which stands for Expected Family Contribution. I'm just going to make a small note. We're not going to go into detail about it. This is going to be changing, this acronym, in 2024. As of now, they could push it out. There's been a lot of craziness going on, but they did pass legislation right before the pandemic to start making adjustments to the financial aid system. So eventually EFC is going to become SAI, or Student Affordability Index. But for our purposes, we don't know when this is going to happen or when it's going to change. We're going to stick with EFC. So expected family contribution, what you want to think of this as is your share of the bill. And it's the minimum, I repeat, minimum amount that the colleges expect you to contribute towards the cost of college before they're going to offer you a dime of financial aid. All right? Because I know people say, well, your EFC is not going to be what you pay. I'm like, yeah, it's the minimum what you're going to pay. So I caught I was at an event and I heard a college admission rep say that. And I'm like, that's a little misleading. Anyway, so let's talk about how that kind of works out then with understanding the formula. So what they're going to do is they're going to take that, remember that cost of attendance number we talked about, that all-inclusive number for the sticker price of a year of college? They're going to take that and subtract your expected family contribution to arrive at your aid eligibility, or what they call your financial need. All right, so that's what you'd be eligible for. So if you're in this situation where your EFC, let's say it's $35,000, and the sticker price of the school is $30,000, you're going to be on the hook for full sticker price, right? You can get access to the loan, but that's about all you're going to be offered, right? So you got to pay the full amount. If your EFC is less, so let's say your EFC is $15,000 and the cost of attendance $30,000, your immediate assumption would be like, oh, well, then we only have to pay $15,000, right? It's just cost of college minus financial aid. But what have we talked about? Because we know this isn't quite right? We know that financial aid is inclusive of both gift aid and loans. And loans we got to pay back, all right? So in reality, what the true calculation is you're going to pay the cost of college minus the free money, minus the gift aid. And that's obviously what's most important to us here in this particular situation. We want as much gift aid as we can possibly get. That doesn't mean that loans aren't important, that we don't want to look at that as something that plays a big role in the overall plan, but we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that loans somehow make college more affordable, because they do not reduce the out-of-pocket cost. And I get really frustrated to see the gimmicks from our own politicians and our own financial institutions say, well, we make loans so reasonable and everyone's got access to them and we help make college more affordable. I'm like, no, it can help finance the cost, no doubt. It can relieve some financial pressure for people, but this idea that it somehow reduces the cost of college makes no sense to me. None of us go buy a car and we get a loan and think somehow we save money on the car, right? That math doesn't add up. So let's just make sure that we remember that loans they can be that doesn't mean loans are bad, it's just realizing that they don't reduce the true out-of-pocket cost of college. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so financial aid breakdown. So on average, this is kind of what it looks like as you look over on the right side of the pie. It's about almost 50% is in federal loans, okay? Then over in the green, you got institutional grants. It's about 17%. Again, that's where that lucrative money is coming from the private colleges or colleges like the University of Michigan. You can see there's a little bit in state grants, but really not much. And then, there's Pell Grants at like 14.2%, but I mean, these are specifically designed for really low-income individuals. If your household income is above $50,000, you're not going to qualify for the Pell Grant. All right, so when you look at this particular pie, what we're really focused on is that left side, right? How do we get as much of that free money, that gift aid, as we possibly can, because that's going to reduce our out-of-pocket cost dollar for dollar. Okay, so let's talk about the two types that I've mentioned already. So we'll start with need-based aid, and that varies by school. So again, college selection and college affordability always go hand in hand. All right, so you want to make sure that you know your college's history to maximize potential gift aid. So kind of giving you some examples here. When you, again, remember financial need is the cost of attendance minus your EFC. That's what determines your financial need. So for example, in that example I gave earlier, if it's a $30,000 EFC, $30,000 cost of attendance, and a $15,000 EFC, you say, well, I'm going to get $15,000. Well, look what this is kind of showing. As a rule of thumb, public colleges only meet of your need about 40 to 65%. And the private colleges, it's more around 70 to 100%. And I would say on the 100% end, that's only about 81 colleges or so in the country, and they usually tend to be the higher end, Ivy League, Duke, Northwestern, Stanford, etc. But that's a big deal, Because if you're thinking about what's affordable for my family and you're thinking I'm going to get the full 15 and I only get 10, well, now I got another $5,000 I got to come up with. All right? So remember that financial aid also isn't all gifting. So again, on the public school, on average, we see about 50-50, 50% gift aid, 50% loans. And then private, it's about 85% gift, given again from their own institutional endowment funds, and then about 15% loans. Okay? So that gift aid is really what we're trying to maximize as much as possible. All right, so is this making sense? Is this resonating? Okay, that's what I want to make sure. All right, so merit aid, right? This has nothing to do with the student's ability to pay, like need-based aid. It's all based on the student's ability to play, whether that's academically, musically, athletically, so on and so forth, right? You just got to meet the criteria. If you meet it, you get the aid, okay? So again, you want to know, kind of the statistics on the schools in terms of how much merit aid do they give on average compared to other schools? Where does your student fall in terms of that admitted class? Are they likely to be in the top 25%? Would they be in the only in the top 50%? Because that's going to make a big difference. And then, do they even offer merit aid? Because I've seen people make the mistake of assuming, my kid's going to go to, they're going to go to Northwestern for swimming, and they're going to get a full ride, and they might get, for athletics, they might get something, but on academic side, those schools, I mean, their acceptance rates are what, 6%? Something like everyone that goes there is highly intelligent. So they don't offer any academic merit aid. It's 100% based on the need of the family. So if the need is there, that they can get it, but otherwise academic aid at those schools, it's just not a reality. It's not going to happen. All right? So now that we've looked at, how do we reduce the cost, we've looked at various factors, college selection being an important component, financial aid, the two different types, as well as making sure our kids graduate in 4 years. We want to talk about funding the cost of college. Okay? So as a financial professional that's worked with a lot of different families, this is what I typically see families do from their approach to pay for college. So the first thing they say is, how much do we have? Okay, we got X amount in savings, and then we're just going to spend it. Okay? Then what they do is they say, okay, well, we need to come up with some extra funds. How can we get more money? And we go out and we borrow it. And then we start looking at, things seem to tighten up a little bit, and now what we're going to go out and do is we're going to try to find more money by reducing our current lifestyle today to free up more cash flow from our monthly income to help pay for college. So I just call that squeezing it, right? And then the last thing that we look at is how can we, we get to like junior, this is usually around junior year, is how can we reduce our costs with financial aid? And it kind of feels like we give up. What else can we do? We're feeling like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. All right, so there's got to be a better way to do that. And then really, it's not that complicated. It can be as easy as ABC. So the A is aid, right? So we've been talking quite a bit about this. We want to evaluate if you're going to qualify for any financial aid. That's the first thing that we want to look at in terms of the financial trajectory and the plan. Again, are you going to qualify for need-based financial aid at some schools, at all schools, or at none of the schools, right? If we're at none of the schools, then we got to start looking at merit aid, and where is our kid going to get that? Borrowing. So we want to make sure that we're identifying and evaluating all borrowing sources so that we can find the right ones that are going to work for us. Now, going back to even that typical approach, what a lot of people do is they wait until junior or senior year until they absolutely have to look at the borrowing sources. But I can tell you it's not very efficient to try and just take the money in your junior or senior year and then you're trying to work on paying that back. It's much easier to smooth that out over the 4 years than it is to try and just take what you can get in that junior and senior year. So we want to make sure that we know our options, what's going to be preferable, what's available to us, and how is that going to fit into our college funding plan. And then getting cash flow efficient. Okay, so people say, oh, this isn't just the squeezing it. No, that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is where are we losing money unknowingly and unnecessarily in our financial picture? And there's a lot of different areas. It could be how we're paying for our house. It could be how we're saving for retirement. It could be taxes. It could be how we're paying for major capital purchases, not including college, but also private school, or even something that's like a home remodel. Like all of those things can be areas where we can transfer money away that we don't have to. So we want to get more efficient because if we can find money, bring it back to the table, we not only have that to help pay for college, but we have that to help solidify our financial future. And then the last thing is, the last thing you want to do is deplete assets. So you don't want to spend a cent of your assets until you have a plan for every kid for all your years of college. And the reason I say that is this is money that we're putting away for our future. We need it for our future. And we want to preserve that as long as we possibly can. And if we don't have a plan, then how do we know which resources are the right ones to deplete? So again, having that plan in place allows us to figure out, okay, here's how much we're going to need. Here's the different sources that we can turn to reduce the cost, increase efficiency. We have some borrowing sources. And now we can go ahead and figure out which are the best assets to deplete if we're going to go that route. All right? So we'll walk through this a little bit more. So we've talked a lot about financial aid already, so let's talk about borrowing sources. So the federal student loans, this is what's known as the direct loan or sometimes the Stafford loan. I've got the rates up here from this year. It's 3.73 for undergraduates. That is highly competitive, right? This is uncollateralized loan too. There's nothing to back this up except for your student's potential to possibly earn a good living later on. That's up a little bit from last year because during the pandemic, rates hit an all-time low and they were at 2.75. You can see the loan origination fee, and these loans are fixed for the entire length of that you have them for the whole term. So if, for example, the students that took the 3.73, that's fixed for the rest of their life. So if interest rates ever go to 7% or something like that, they're locked in at 3.73. All right. Then you've got the loans for graduates at 5.28, and then you got the Parent Plus loans. These are federal loans for parents. I am not a big fan of these loans. If it's the only good source that someone has access to, and a small amount could be okay. But if people are looking at needing tens of thousands of dollars in Parent Plus loans, I hate to say it, we might be looking at the wrong type of colleges. Okay. So any questions on the federal student loans?
You said fixed for the life
of the term of the loan. Yep.
Yeah. What is the term of the loan?
Usually you have a 10-year or 20-year repayment schedule. Often people will ask me, should I refinance these into like something like SoFi or Credible? Usually your federal loans you want to leave separate from your like a private loan. Okay, so because it is possible that parents could get decent rates and need more than just what you get the $5,500 your freshman year from that, and they might look for other sources, which we'll talk about. But if you're ever looking at refinancing, usually you're looking at the private student loans in terms of doing that with someone like a SoFi, because the federal is pretty favorable, and then if there's ever any kind of debt forgiveness that's been talked about and that happens and you refinanced out, you're not going to get that ability. Okay? All right, so let's talk about some other borrowing sources. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And people sometimes will say, well, Joe, how is there such thing as a good loan? How is there such thing as good debt? Right? So I want us to think about this for a second because this really gets misunderstood about the true definition of debt. Most people think that a debt and a liability are synonymous, and they are not. Right? Okay, so what is the true definition of debt? So the true definition of debt is it's a financial obligation in which the only way that you can pay for it is with income you have yet to earn. Okay? So think of credit cards. Right? There's people that have absolutely nothing in savings, and they get credit card, and they can never get ahead, and that's when the snowball happens. That is the absolute definition of debt. But what we're looking at here is mortgages, home equity line of credit, policy loan from a life insurance contract, collateralized loan against a brokerage account or a margin account, we're talking about collateral here. What we're saying is, wait, I've got money that I'm saving and preserving for my future. So I've got two things that's good about that is, one, I could technically take the money and just get rid of it and pay off college. But now I've ratcheted up the financial pressure because I no longer have as much access to my money, and I've also killed any compound interest I've been earning, right? So I've kind of messed up my balance sheet a little bit. So this is why these can be really good loan sources, and because they're collateralized, this is where we're going to find the most favorable rates and the flexibility on term options as well, in terms of, I don't know, there's people that are business owners that say, I don't have the income right now, but I got it coming in the end of the year. It's like, well, it's really nice to have something like one of these options where they can bridge the gap until that money comes in. So there's a lot of different things to look at from that particular perspective. But again, these are going to be the most preferred loan options. Bad loan sources. So I mentioned that home equity lines of credits are typically good, but you obviously need to be careful in terms of looking at what type of home equity line of credit is, what's the term, they can be interest only and we're not making any payments. Do we know what we're going to have to pay back, how we're going to pay back? Because if we have properly used them, we can get ourselves in trouble. 401k loans, a bad loan source, don't touch it. Again, 401ks they're a retirement account, they're meant for retirement, leave it for that. They also have to be paid back in 5 years. So it's really not a great loan source for college, because I don't know many parents who are like, yeah, that's an easy thing for me to do when I got like 2 kids in college at the same time, that I'm going to be able to pay a loan source back in 5 years. And if you can't do it, you're going to end up paying tax and penalty on top of that, plus the money gets moved to a cash part. So it's not like it gets to stay invested in the market. So avoid 401k loans. And then what's the ugly? We already mentioned the one, credit cards. Just don't use those for college, unless it's like the money's coming in 30 days, something like that. 401k IRA liquidation. Again, this is money we need for our future. They're called retirement accounts for a reason. They're not college savings vehicles. So we want to preserve that money. Also, again, that helps protect our balance sheet. And then it also ensures that we don't, while there are stipulations, we don't want to catch ourselves having to pay taxes, which could then cost you on financial aid, as well as potential penalties. All right? Any questions on the borrowing sources? So I know sometimes that trips people up. Okay. Guys, must be doing a fantastic job. All right, so sequence of depletion. All right, so we talked about the depleting assets as our last resort. So let's talk about kind of just some rules of thumb. Everyone's going to have a different circumstance and a different situation. So these are just kind of rules of thumb. So 529 plans, if you're not familiar with them, you may not have one, but these are college savings plans. And because they're earmarked for college specifically, those are the first things that we want to use as soon as we can, pay off that amount, and be done with them. And then the next level would be if you've got other non-retirement, keyword non-retirement investments, then what you want to do is go from your lowest, rate of return investments to your highest rate of return. Kind of sounds self-explanatory, but obviously you want to preserve the ones that are doing well for you or will do well over the long term versus the ones that are more conservative. But going along with that is number 3 is mind your capital gains. So if you have, for example, a mutual fund that has a long-term capital gain, when you go to sell that, it's going to be realized that not only do you have to pay the tax, but that income is going to get added to your subsequent year on the FAFSA as income. And income counts, it's the number 1 factor on the financial aid form. So that result of selling that asset could lower how much aid you'd get the next year from the college. Again, if aid's going to be part of the question for you on the need-based side. So another rule of thumb with that, if you're looking at selling non-retirement assets to raise some money to pay for college and you have capital gains, best to do that before December of your student's sophomore year to avoid it ever showing up on a financial aid form. Otherwise, you got to wait until like their junior year of college before you can look at that option. But if you have younger kids, then that changes the whole story.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so if on taxable accounts, the goal would be you'd want to sell and realize those gains before the end of December of your student's sophomore year. Because otherwise that income that's produced from that capital gain will get added to income and penalize you the next year on the financial aid forms if you're going to qualify for need-based aid. Now, if you've got only, let's say, just one kid in college, you can also look at the back end of it and say, well, if they're using the prior year, once my kid gets to their junior year of college, I'm safe because I don't have to use that tax return anymore on a financial aid form. Does that make sense? Okay.
So do you fill out that FAFSA form every year?
Yep, every year that it's to get that renewed amount because obviously people have changing circumstances and
For merit too? For merit too?
Yep, you're going to want to do it for merit just again, if there's a financial situation change, they want to dole out that government money before they give the institutional grants. So yeah, it's and for most people, not everyone's going to have to do the CSS profile, and I will say the FAFSA is not complicated, but our government's really good at making it complicated. I read some of the questions sometimes and go, who thinks that? I mean, first of all, on that front, never let a kid do that alone. Because if I can read these things and think, who would thought that was a good idea to word the question that way, there's no way an 18-year-old understands it. So, but it's pretty easy they tell you the line items on your tax return that you got to put in. And then if you don't have anything complicated in your financial picture, it really shouldn't take that long to complete the financial aid form. So, all right, so we talked about capital gains. Remind again, hands off the retirement accounts. I think we all get that one, preserve those. And then don't fear collateralization. Again, I just like to repeat that point, understanding what the true definition of debt is. If I can keep my balance sheet optimized, relieve the financial pressure, I mean, just think about it. Is it easier to give a college a couple $100 a month or $20,000 at once, right? So that's the hard part too, is it's not always your first kid or the first 2 years of college, because a lot of parents have done usually something. They've got a 529, they got resources, but if we don't have the full plan in place, it's usually like junior or senior year that starts to feel like, okay, now we're feeling the squeeze, and then we got another kid coming up. How the heck are we supposed to navigate this? So what are your keys to success in terms of creating a plan? You want to obviously minimize your costs of college. So this involves us doing that due diligence of saying, okay, what are the costs of attendance? What is our category of aid? Are we sometimes never always going to qualify for need-based aid? If we're never, then we got to look at the merit-based side. What's our EFC? What are the graduation stats? And what are the award histories at these particular schools? collegedata.com has a lot of good financial statistics that you can look at in terms of the various colleges that your child may be considering. So again, this is such an important step that gets overlooked. And just going back to that car example that we were talking about, if we skip this and don't do our due diligence, it's essentially like taking your new teenage driver out to the used car lot and saying, go ahead and pick out whatever one you want, right? Because it's like, if we don't know any of this information, we're in the dark. We don't know. We're just hoping one lands like the 5 schools that they were interested in end up being affordable. Okay, so again, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. I'm giving you all the things that you can look at, but man, if you can just pull out a few of these and do the due diligence, it's going to do wonders. Determine your funding strategy. So you want to identify the sources that we might use. We got financial aid. We talked about the borrowing sources. If we're going to use our own savings, it's like a down payment, which ones are going to be the most adequate to do that for efficiency's sake. And then we want to start creating that college funding plan today. Month by month, year by year, whatever you need, however you do things, but we want to start creating that action plan for all the college years plus any years that you're going to need to repay the loans you may take out. And I know some people look at this and go, whew, that's overwhelming to think about. But what I'll tell people is the way that I always do this, like when I'm working with someone or I just giving generic tips to someone, is saying work backwards, right? It's kind of like the airline example where they're like, put your mask on before assisting your kids. It's the same thing here. We want to make sure that we're on track for our financial future. Do we have that in place? And once we know that, it becomes very easy for us to work backwards and say, now we can kind of figure out how much we can afford to pay without tipping us over the edge. Then that's going to help direct where we need to go from college selection to looking at these various components and developing that plan. It seems overwhelming, but there's a lot that you can do to simplify this and not make it so burdensome. So again, I say this, these are the 3 questions you want to answer. Do we have any parents of seniors in here? Okay. So I always try to tell people, and it's never too late. I have people come in here and say, oh, I wish I would have known some of this stuff, like when my kid was a sophomore in high school, or even I've had kids in freshman year or sophomore year of college. I'm like, it's not too late. There's always something that you can do. But these are generally the 3 questions I tell parents and students you want to know the answer to before you even apply to your first college. Okay, so we went over these earlier. How much is the most that we are willing to pay? Because that sets our target, right? And then that also helps us avoid a come to Jesus conversation. If we're just flying in the dark and we go to the bookstore and we get all the gear and we all of a sudden get the acceptance letter and then the 8 award letter comes a few weeks later and it's like we didn't get anything or we didn't come close to what we were expecting. And now we got to talk about this is not even doable, right? Or how much are we willing to take out in personal loans for 4 years of an experience, right? I mean, I had a lot of fun in college, but it's crazy today the premium that parents are facing and paying for just saying, well, they have to go off, they have to have that experience. So we just want to make sure that we answer that question so that kind of sets the expectations for both the parents and the students. And then how can we reduce our costs at each college? We went through all the various sources there, making sure that we know what are all the levers that we can pull to bring this down as much as possible. And then how do we fund that college expense? How are we going to bring this all together and pay for it as efficiently as possible so that we're not rationing up the financial pressure while our kids are in college and that we can stay up to speed for retirement, okay? So I know at this point I've presented a ton of information in a short amount of time, and you probably have a bunch of stuff bubbling up in your brain in terms of questions or just be feeling overwhelmed. Now, there's a phrase out there that says that information is power, and I believe that is an incomplete statement, right? Information is potential power. It doesn't become real until you do something about it, okay? So one of the things that you can do, if it's important to you and you value it, if you want a chance to schedule a conversation with me, we can do that. I've been doing that right now on Zoom because that's just been easier with parent schedules and kids' activities, and we kind of got used to that with the pandemic. If someone wants to meet with me in person, that's fine too. But we'd be online for about 50, 60 minutes, give you a chance again to ask your specific questions and talk about your specific situation, what's important to you. But I also want to, if people are looking for help, they want to know, what is it you do, how do you do it, and, how much does it cost? And those are the things that I would for sure talk about. So in terms of putting together a strategy and working with us, this is what we do. We're fiduciaries, so we're looking out for best interest, figure out where our kids can get into college, get aid, afford to go, have a structured plan in place so you can pay for college efficiently while staying on track for retirement, minimize taxes on college and retirement income. We didn't talk much about that, but any money we don't have to pay to Uncle Sam is just as good as a grant or scholarship. Preserve your savings and investments for retirement. We've mentioned that quite a bit. Want to hold on to those retirement accounts, and then maximize your college aid opportunities. Get as much free money as we can. So, if you could get all of these things on this list, I think you'd be pretty happy. Maybe not as happy as this fantastic couple in their mustard turtlenecks, but I'd imagine pretty happy. So, you guys all have those eval forms. So before you leave tonight, if you could just let me know how was the content. What if there's something you wish was talked about, let me know. If you thought I stunk, it's okay. You can let me know. And you also notice there, if you want to talk, that's great. You can fill out a time, let me know. If you don't, it's not a problem either. I realize I'm busy. You guys are busy. It's not important to you. I'm not looking to harass anybody. So if that's important, go ahead. And then also, you can check out financialanchors.com. I just do like a 1-2 I'm down. It's gotten so busy. I'm doing it once a month now. But I just released my 48th episode. So kind of those issues around good debt, the things that don't always get talked about. I have a lot of those resources just on that website, and they're like, it's like a TED Talk, just 1 to 2 minute thing, so you're welcome to check that out. So if I don't talk to you again, don't see you, I hope there's at least one thing that you guys can take away from tonight that you can go home, implement, start using in your college planning process that you hadn't thought of before to try and improve your situation. So I'll stick around if people have any questions, but I hope this has been helpful. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, I'm got a question around the games. This said everyone should fill out the federal student aid application.
Yes.
At what point do we do that?
So it opens October 1st of your student's senior year. And then, Renee, would you remind me, because I usually work mostly with students that are going off for the first time, what is the due date for subsequent years? Do you know about what that is?
So after that,
I know, I always forget that as well.
I don't know. March 1 is the latest that you'll want to do it for Michigan schools.
Yeah.
Between October 1 and March 1, but definitely before the Thanksgiving is a good rule.
Yeah, that's what I do, because you get to the holidays, you don't want to worry about it, and then you get into depressing winter here, and it's the last thing you want to think about. So, yes.
You said to know your EFC.
Yep.
Is that when you fill out the FAFSA, does it tell you what yours is, or how do you know?
No, there's a lot of resources out there that you can use, EFC calculators. I used to have a subscription to a software to do that. I kind of use that on a case-by-case basis. The schools all have their own online dashboard kind of thing that you can use to do a quick EFC calculator. I don't know if there's one. The hard part is like what schools you're looking at. If you do the FAFSA one, it's usually it's decently accurate. It should be because the formula's been the same for years.
So when you do the FAFSA, it will give that to you at the end.
Yeah, so you will get a SAR, a student aid report that will actually let you know what your EFC is. But it's a good idea, that's a good question, because you want to try and figure that out ahead of time. Because your EFC is going to dictate, what schools that you should be looking at. And my point is, like with those different aid forms and how colleges look differently, your EFC you could have 4 different colleges and have 4 different EFCs.
So if you go on each individual college, they kind of will like to know, if I know my EFC and I want to know what colleges I can afford based on it, does each college give you that information? Like in their,
It's called a net price calculator.
Yeah.
net price count?
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's going to be specific to the college. I recommend FAFSA Forecaster. Is that the one that you said might be semi-accurate?
I'm not. There's they're coming online more and more.
Forecaster with the number 4. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of as a financial professional, I can get access to ones where if I use it on a case, but that's why I use it on a case by case basis. So if I have a family that's looking at a variety of different types of colleges, and I know the EFC is going to be all over the place, I might look at paying for a subscription or a one-off on that type of situation to say, let's figure this out, because you might have, we might find that one school is going to be $10,000 cheaper just based on need-based financial aid each year. So yeah, but I think the net price calculators is a fine place to start, just to give you a ballpark figure.
And each college that you apply to, let's say you apply to 4 or 5 colleges, you need to apply for the need-based financial aid and also the merit-based financial aid for each college every time you apply.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
So like you said, there's a need-based financial aid that you want to apply for.
Yep.
And a merit-based. So each college is that 2 things that you go through on each application?
No. That's a good question. So it's 2 different categories of aid, right? But when you complete the financial aid form, that's specifically really used for the need-based side. The merit is, like I said, with the merit aid, they may look at the FAFSA just to say, of the merit aid, are we going to give you government dollars first, or are we going to give you our own institutional dollars because you're not going to qualify? That's really where the FAFSA plays a role there. Other than that, it's just does your child meet the criteria? If you meet the criteria, you get the aid, but they won't double you up. So for example, if you get a $10,000 merit aid award and you're only eligible for $10,000 on the need-based side, and they already gave you 10, you're not going to get any more than that. So they won't
they're
do it.
figuring that out through the application.
Yeah,
A
so-
lot of times you'll
Nice.
find out the merit aid right when your student gets accepted. For the students
Yep.
that give out what we call trigger or automatic
Yep.
merit aid. And it's not always required, but it's still smart to link the two and to do that. And then the need-based aid usually comes back a little bit later. It's great when they come together, because it's really nice to know all of that early.
Yeah, and so and on the net price calculator, it's not too early. I don't care if your kid's a freshman, it's not too early just to get an idea of like, okay, this is where we stand. I think I had a couple from here. They had a freshman, and then they had all younger kids at that time, and I was like, kudos to you guys for like actually looking into this, because they kind of had started piecing that together well before their kid started even considering what colleges they'd even be interested in. And it also makes it easier just in terms of developing the plan, if you can just chunk it off in stages over the years. But I'm a parent too. I got little kids, but I understand the whole procrastination thing, and we're just on a grind, and so that's why it's never too late. So, any other questions? No? Has this been helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
Very
All right, good. We keep it shorter this time? Did we, like 45 minutes or so? Or did I go over
About an hour
with the questions?
with the question.
Okay, good. So, well, good. Well, I hope you guys have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
Joe.